And it was not from day one. It was just so different. And the way that he reacted to all of the parenting tools that we thought we knew were the quote unquote right ones just didn't work with him. And so he was really the impetus that sent us back to the drawing board to say, what else is there in parenting? What else could be behind the behavior? What is this trauma thing? Does this affect our family? And it turns out it does.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. Are you enjoying Failing Motherhood? Be the amazing person you are and go ahead and write up a quick little review to spread the love. Also, I'm just going to come out there and say it. As if parenting in a pandemic can get any worse, COVID cases are skyrocketing everywhere. The weather is about to get real cold real fast. Schools are likely to close again. And the holidays inevitably spike our stress levels even more. There's so little we can control about life right now. Allow me to provide you support in such an unsupported time. Not just with platitudes, but with real expertise. You get to decide what support you have going into these next few months. In my opinion, you need a person. Together, let's extend your patience, problem solve those nasty behaviors you're seeing, and nix you feeling like the good cop or the bad cop all the time. Schedule your free call with me today at the link in the show notes. Now, I can't wait to dive into today's episode. In the spirit of National Adoption Month, last episode was a story of a birth mom, and this week we're talking all about fostering and adoption. Melissa went from 3 kids to 6 in the matter of a few months. She adopted from Korea, where she was adopted from as well. She shares her journey to discovering trauma-informed parenting approaches and how she takes care of herself through it all. Let's get to it. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Melissa Corkum. Melissa has gotten certified as a life coach, Enneagram coach, essential oil specialist, and empowered to connect parent trainer, so overwhelmed and exhausted parents don't have to. She's a mom to 6 kids by birth and adoption, and they've taught her what creates thriving parent-child relationships and what doesn't. She runs her business, The Cork Board Online, as well as co-hosts the podcast, The Adoption Connection. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, Danielle, so much for having me.
No, thanks so much for being here. Your bio sounds like you would be the model superhero mom because you know all the things. So surely you've never felt like you were failing motherhood.
Oh, certainly not. I mean, all the things just means that I have so often felt like a failure that I felt the need to go read all the books and go to all the conferences and get every training I could get my hands on, because I think we only do a lot of those things out of desperation.
That is true. That's a good point. We need all the help we can get as parents.
Yeah.
Oh, so true. So tell me the ages of your kids.
They are 13, 15, 17, 19, 21, and 22.
That was a pop quiz and you nailed it.
I did think, because we just had a couple of birthdays, but I think that's right for everyone.
Yeah, that's a lot to keep track of. So I'm excited to hear what you share with your work with parents, but then I also feel like your story is just so interesting that parents can relate to and really find themselves in if they are parenting kiddos that have had trauma in their past or through adoption. And so I just can't wait to get to know more of your story. So talk us through early motherhood for you, and what was the timeline of what how you became a parent?
Yeah, well, we got married really young and had babies right away. And so we have 2 kids by birth. And so those are our middle 2. They are the 15 and 17-year-old. And then my husband always knew that he wanted to adopt, which was interesting because I'm actually an adult adoptee. And so that just seemed like providential that that was going to be a part of our family story as well. And in 2009, we brought home a toddler from Korea, which is also where I was born. And I just thought that we would do this great because we already had I think they were 3 and 5 at the time, which is laughable now, right? That's like an inch into motherhood. But we thought we were doing really well with them. They're great kids. And, all this talk about, transracial adoption and kids being the only children of color in their home, that wasn't a thing. I have 2 siblings who are also adopted from Korea, and there's just a lot of color in our family. And I was like, well, and he'll look like me, and he hadn't been in an institution. And so we just didn't understand trauma. We just had heard about, orphanage behavior. And so we just thought he'll just be normal, and it'll just be just like parenting our other 2 kids. And it was not from day one. It was just so different. And the way that he reacted to all of the parenting tools that we thought we knew were the quote unquote right ones just didn't work with him. And so he was really the impetus that sent us back to the drawing board to say, what else is there in parenting? What else could be behind the behavior? What is this trauma thing? Does this affect our family? And it turns out it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then how did you find other resources, or is that when you started kind of diving into more trainings?
Yeah. So there was this book that I had been recommended called The Connected Child. It was written by Dr. Karen Purvis and David Cross, and it really pioneered this kind of therapeutic parenting model for what she coined kids from hard places. Mm-hmm. And what I think is interesting about her definition of kids from hard places, because it wasn't just this is only for adopted and foster kids, is she listed things that from her research we know now radically change the structure and chemistry of the brain. And foster care and adoption changes who your primary caregiver is. And so that is one of the things. But the other things are things like stressful pregnancy, either in utero or early exposure to drugs or substances, the obvious things like abuse and neglect, but also early medical trauma. And so as I read that list, I thought, man, this probably applies to a lot of folks. I mean, even just the stressful pregnancy alone, there are studies that show that babies, even up to 6 months after they're born, still mirror the stress hormone profile of their mothers. And we live in a world, if you're pregnant right now in kind of what we hope is the tail end of a quarantine during a global pandemic, that's impactful. It's impacting, everything in our life, including our babies in utero. And so, and early medical trauma, how many babies do we know, have something that we think is seemingly minor, but it means that they get whisked off to the NICU for maybe even just a couple hours, right? But it just impacts their early structure for how they believe the world works in terms of sensory input and some other attachment things. So that's been really interesting to dive in more and then just realize the different accommodations that we need to think about when we're parenting kids this way. And to know that at the end of the day, even if none of those things are necessarily true of our kids, that there's always a reason behind behaviors. It's always communicating something about the way that our kid's brain is operating or not operating. And if we parent out of that knowledge, rather than looking at behaviors as just straight up behaviors, we'll always do better as parents. And we'll feel better.
Yes. Yes. And when I first came across that book and the idea of trauma-informed care, I, of course, resonated with it, but only because I had already started seeing that from little t trauma in kids, where I haven't worked specifically with parents in the foster care system or in the from adoptions, but every kid experiences adversity. And they have lots of complexity in their emotions and their ability to regulate and all of the ways that they're trying to process the world. And there's, like you said, reasoning behind that behavior. So what we're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg, and we have to go deeper. And when we understand the complexity of what's going on with that child, we can definitely better find tools that will work and speak to and relate to and connect with that child. So even if your child hasn't come from a different country, like this still pretty much applies to every kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, if you're raising a kid during now, they've experienced a global pandemic, which depending on how your child integrates information, how you're doing through it, will either, I think, register in some kids as a little T, but in some kids, it's going to be a big T.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we're all in this together now.
Yeah, pretty much.
No exceptions.
Well, and here's the other thing, you know, as we learned more about this, I just realized this is a great way to view people with great amounts of compassion, giving them the benefit of the doubt, thinking not what's wrong with you, but what might have happened to you that you see the world this way and that you need to react to the world this way. And so it doesn't just impact our parenting. It's impacted the way I see friends, I see family, I see my own relationships, I see work relationships, the way my husband sees his team at work. And it's how we parent and look at all of our kids, even the ones who came from really healthy attachment that we've had since birth.
Yes, we could definitely translate this to all of our relationships and give everybody a little more grace and understanding. So you kept on adopting kids, am I right?
We did. So I call it Thai Fog. That was our little guy from Korea. And we knew that we wanted to adopt again. And in the adoption world, there's kind of this tax credit and it applies to as many kids as you adopt. But if you adopt more than one at a time, you only have to do one home study, all these things. And we thought, well, what if we kept a sibling group together? Financially, we could kind of play the tax system to our benefit and only have to travel once and different things. We ended up with unrelated kids, but we ended up with 3 of them. And it was it kind of happened in stages. We were first matched with 2 older kids. They were 13 and 14, unrelated. Then we found out our son had been raised with another girl who had also gone to the same orphanage as him. And so they, you know, for lack of a better term, were kind of siblings, or at least like cousins. They felt like family. And we really thought it would be great to be able to keep them together because they had so much shared experience. And you lose so much when you come to a family through international adoption. So we were able to kind of tack her on to the end. And so we brought home our 13 and 14-year-old, who are now our 21 and 22-year-old, in August 2012. And then we went back and brought home our middle daughter in October 2012. So we went from like 3 kids to 6 kids in like 3 months or 2 months or something like that.
Oh my goodness. So how did that affect life as you knew it?
Well, we always, we went in thinking, well, now we have the training, right? Now, at that point, we had gone to Texas and become Empowered to Connect parent trainers. And Empowered to Connect is the parenting model that came out of the Connected Child book. Okay. And we just thought, well, at this time, we know, like fool me once. And the thing is it's such a learning curve. There's so much. And older kids is a whole new thing, plus teenagers and all the things. And also, I didn't fully understand how I would react and how my own behavior patterns would change under such kind of extreme and chronic stress. Yeah. And how I would process or not process very well being rejected. Our kids kind of thought they wanted a family, but then it wasn't quite what they thought. There was just a lot of adjustment all the way around. And I don't think we were set up for success or prepared very well to really understand kind of the impact that all of those different dynamics would have on our family. So life got super chaotic, kind of turned upside down for about 3 years. And, a lot of what I work with families doing now the lessons I've learned came out of that time. They're, kind of learned through the school of hard knocks. And, in my bio, I say, like, they've taught me a lot about what works and what doesn't. We learned a lot of our lessons the hard way. So, you talk about being a failure. Like, my list is long. When you're a mother to 6 kids, you have so many more opportunities to fail.
That's true. Oh, yeah. So did that affect like your own image of yourself and your confidence? And how did that affect you personally to be able to like find the coping skills you needed to get through and show up in the ways you wanted to?
In some ways, it was like do or die. We were really in a pretty extreme crisis situation for a while. The trauma that our older kids brought with them, we kind of call trauma as like the ripple effect in the pond. It's like the gift that keeps on giving, and it just ripples from the initial trauma, and it ripples out, and it affects everybody who comes into that sphere of that person who is really self-protecting. And we also, part of our story is one of our kids needed out-of-home treatment. And, it was devastating. I mean, like the ultimate failure to have a child in your house and realize that you couldn't do it, like that you could not be the answer to keeping everyone safe, for leading them to healing, that there had to be so many other resources. And now I know that that's not necessarily a failure, but it sure felt like one at the time, I think as parents, we feel like we're the end of the road for our kids. We feel like we're our kids' everything, right? And we can take them to therapists and get services. And we certainly did a lot. We've had occupational therapists and speech therapists and all the different trauma therapists, all the different things. But to realize that, you need a team that's much bigger than you, and that it might look like your child not living in your house for a season or for a long season, does feel kind of like the ultimate failure in all things mothering.
Yeah. Wow. That would be a huge hurdle to be able to work through. And how did you come to the terms with realizing that it wasn't failure?
And it sounds kind of silly, but this realization that I can only control myself, that I think as parents, I came into parenthood thinking if I disciplined correctly, if I did all the things, like, into the black box, and out the black box would come a child who wasn't perfect all the time. I certainly didn't expect that, but who was like what we would consider in society like a pretty functional, generally respectful and polite human being.
Right.
And that's not necessarily true, especially when you're not starting with a clean slate with a child. And we say even kids adopted at birth come with 9 months of history, that prenatal trauma is a real thing. And so again, like it sounds simple, almost stupidly simple to say I can only control myself. But I think what I see in different parenting patterns is that we often parent like we can control an outcome.
Right.
That we can either protect our kids from something or convince them or manipulate them into better behavior. And we just had enough experiences to know that we could do everything right and still have a really big mess on our hands. And so that was freeing. And so I really worked a lot with parents on kind of redefining success around the fact that we only can control ourselves. So rather than looking at the end of a day and thinking, was I successful based on whether or not my child had a meltdown or, did something embarrassing at the grocery store, if I could look back and say that I had a couple things that I knew I wanted to do, most of mine actually revolve around my own self-care, and I did those things, or I just kept my cool in the face of a massive grocery store meltdown, right? Then that was success, not necessarily the behavior of my kids.
Yes. That is such a freeing truth if you can really realize that and embrace it. And that is a huge message I want to share with this podcast is you can still be doing a fantastic job if you're and relinquish the control of the outcome. And it's okay. They are not a report card. And like you can have a really good day as a parent, even if their behavior is off the wall crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and some of, I think, parents' worst fears in a lot of
Yeah.
ways have been part of our story. We have a son who we fostered for a while who was actually a young adult when he lived with us. He's serving time in a federal prison. We have a daughter who got pregnant as a teen and moved home and is living with us and raising her daughter. And I think all of those things feel like, when you think about, I just don't want my daughter to go out and get pregnant, or I just
Yeah.
don't want my kid to end up in jail, or I don't want I don't want my kid to fail out of school. I don't want my kid to do this, this, and this. And we've really learned that if we have a longer view, like if this is an ultra marathon, right, that those things don't define our kids and they're not the end of the road. We still have a really healthy relationship with our bonus son from prison. And, I say it's like the easiest parenting I've ever done because I know exactly where he is and I write him letters and we have limited contact. But that's not the end of the road, that as long as our relationships are strong, we still can influence and guide our kids long past 18.
Yes.
And I think 18 also feels like a barometric measurement of parenting, what's your kid doing when they hit adulthood.
Right. It is. And if we focus on that too much, then we probably are going to derail keeping the main things if the main thing is our relationship. And that hasn't been, I don't think, shared enough, how critical and all-encompassing that parent-child relationship is. So would you go into like some of the background of just the best practices recommended through like the connected child approach?
Yeah, I think the big things are to remember that behavior is always communication and that our mind and our body are very closely related, right? We can't really separate them. And so the principles that I bring from Empowered to Connect and the Connected Child, and then also additional things from other brain science and great, neuropsychologists like Dan Siegel and Dan Hughes, that we need to think about our kids from a foundational level, kind of proactively. So rather than, when parents come to me, they're just like, fix the behavior, right? The behavior is kind of the thing that derails us every day. It screams at us, literally in a lot of cases.
Yes.
And we just want it to stop, right? Our nervous system is on alert and it's saying, just make it stop.
Yes.
But if we can back that up a little bit and look at what are the foundational things that even come before behavior, things like physical things, food, water, sleep, is there an underlying sickness, sensory integration things, felt safety. Stephen Porges has done a lot of really foundational work through the polyvagal theory and felt safety and how that impacts behavior. Emotional regulation. If we have really big feelings that we're not managing well, then they're going to come out like really big behaviors. Right. And then skill needs, just looking at primary brain tasks. What is our child telling us through their behavior about what their brain can or can't do, all the way down to just little things like, can it translate information from one situation to another? Can it hold a memory long enough to complete a task that we're asking it to do? And so those 5 things are the 5 pillars that I teach to parents that I interact with, that there's really just those 5 reasons that kids can misbehave. And I think the other really big thing is what we're bringing to the table. There's these things called mirror neurons, and our nervous system is sending billions of messages to our kids non-verbally. Even though we're talking, we're telling them certain things, we're telling them, everything's going to be okay. But if we're not feeling it inside, that message of our own internal chaos is billions of times louder than whatever words we're telling them. And so just our own regulation, the trickle-down effect of being the solid foundation for your family and not putting your own care, and self-care kind of has a lot of connotations right now, but just putting your own care on the back burner. I'll get to that after I deal with the lying. I'll get to that after I feed my kids. They have to be the priority. We have to prioritize how we are doing because that's foundational to our entire family. And we can't really afford not to do those things.
Yes. Yes. Because I think that's such a misconception is like if I am selfless and sacrificial and I just give to my kids, then they will turn out great and then I can have time to get my identity and self back later. But they are learning much more from our modeled behavior and the example that we're leading with the way that we lead our life than they are from the actual teaching that we're doing. And it's a huge missed opportunity if we are not making the most of our own life at the same time. And yeah, I agree. Self-care is like, well, I'm not going to go get massages right now, but it's so much more than that. It's just the things that you need for your sanity to have the patience level that you want to function at so that you can show up for them and communicate non-verbally the way that you want to. And it's so important.
Yeah, I like to define it as like, what are the things that you can do throughout the day that kind of make you a better mom or a better wife? They could be little. They could be that you actually sit down and drink your coffee in peace in the morning. They could be a walk. They could be just stepping out your front door a couple times a day, taking a few deep breaths. But, back to we can only control ourselves. I tell parents when I work, I do a lot of behavior management with families, but we start with this foundational part of the parents, because at the end of the day, I can't guarantee when I work with you that your child's going to stop X, Y, or Z behavior. I wish I could, but I can't. It's a terrible business model. But what I can do is help you create the solid foundation in your family and give you tools so that you can manage behaviors more effectively. But also, even if the behaviors never go away, because some of our kids from trauma will have these self-protective strategies that are not socially appropriate for years and years and years.
Yeah.
That they won't run your life, that you'll have the energy to deal with them in the best way possible and have like you mentioned, patience. That's the part that we can control. We can control how we're showing up in the face of a situation where your child may have permanent brain damage and do ridiculous stuff all day long. And it's not manipulative and it's not, defiance necessarily. It's just, the brain not firing the way it's supposed to, and dumb stuff happens. And that's going on in my house right now. And it happened this morning, but I can't change that. I can radically accept it, and I can be who I need to be to kind of walk through that without, severing a relationship or strangling a kid.
Right. That's the goal. So I know a lot of parents struggle with feeling embarrassed of their child's behavior, especially if they're out in public or around their parents or their in-laws or friends that have, perfect kids in their mind, and they see their child, misbehaving and just have a super hard time not making that be a reflection of their own self and how they're doing as a parent. So what advice do you give for kind of like detaching from that, or what new perspective do they need?
Yeah. I think a lot of that always comes back to some kind of trigger or some kind of way that we were formatively shown the world as we grew up through attachment relationships or other different things. So I always think we probably all need therapists, and they are really gifted, or you should find one who's really gifted at helping you sort out why when Johnny lies, you see red, right? Because you might think, well, all parents see that. Well, I mean, none of us are thrilled about it, but some of us deal with it, with more logic and more control and more responsiveness instead of reactiveness than others. For other people, it might be being ignored or rejected. If your child gives you the silent treatment, that might send you to a spiral. So figuring out what behaviors really kind of get you where it hurts, and then, kind of unpacking that a little bit. Like I said, the behavior, it doesn't change the behavior so much, but it gives you insight to, why that's so hard, or why it's so hard when your child behaves a certain way in front of a certain person. It might not be a big deal if Johnny behaves that way in front of your best friend. It might feel like you're going to die if that happens in front of your mother or your father, right? And there's reasons. There are reasons for that. Also, you know, whether your child had early childhood adversity or trauma, or if they have like a formal diagnosis like ADHD, that means that your child has a physical disability. It's an invisible one, but it's of the brain. And like I said, it changes the chemistry and the structure. And unfortunately, the symptoms of our kids' invisible disabilities are behaviors which knock up against all these other values that are in our society about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And they're also invisible. So there's nothing for society to kind of hang that on. But I think that's an important mind shift that we work on a lot, because we never look at a child who's a paraplegic in a wheelchair and say, like, could you just act a different way at Thanksgiving? Could you just walk for grandma and grandpa at Thanksgiving this year? Right? We don't expect that because we know that the wheelchair is an accommodation for a, verifiable official disability, but it's one that's just more widely accepted in society. And so when we think about the ways that we need to accommodate our kids and their behaviors, whether it be that they need to be a little extra closer, or they need, that increased supervision, or they need to not be at Thanksgiving dinner with 80 other people, or that you can only stay for 30 minutes, that you need to be unapologetic about those accommodations because they're basically like your kid's wheelchair.
Oh, yes. Unapologetic. That's exactly where we need to be, because we are our kids' advocate. We are all they have as a mediator between the society's structure and expectations and framework and their current abilities and skills. And they're trying their best, usually. Like, kids don't choose negative behaviors to be miserable.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good. Yeah, it doesn't feel good for them. And I think we have to be really okay. Like, we really have to wrap our mind around that. But that gives us opportunities. If we kind of deal with our own stuff and our own triggers, then when we hit those bumps in the road, or we hit that kind of adversity in ourselves with our relationships around what other people in our sphere think about either how our child behaves or how we have to treat them to support them, and we've kind of dealt with all those internal triggers, then instead of that situation triggering us to where we don't know what to do, or we get really angry, or we get really reactive, then we can also facilitate a conversation that helps inform the people that we love what's going on. And then also set healthy boundaries, because not everyone in the world needs to know that about your kid. And if they can't treat your family with love and grace and kindness, then, we have to be a little choosy about who we're, just putting in our sphere all the time. So I believe in that too. But, the people that you've chosen that you want to be in relationship with, whether they're family or otherwise, we need to be diligent about staying regulated for ourselves so that we can advocate for our kids and help everyone understand. Because then we'll all be better, right? Because once they understand it about your kid, then they can understand it about someone else's kid. And then they can understand it about the classroom that they teach in or the office that they work in. And, then we're all making the world a better place.
Yes. And one of our deepest human needs is to be understood. And I think we miss the boat on that so often in our relationships, of really feeling out that deep level of feeling understood ourselves and with our kids. So that would be a huge opportunity to strengthen that muscle, for us with our kids first. And then we can expand that to all the other relationships that we have. So is there a particular season that was the most difficult for you, or a certain circumstance that was really challenging?
I think those years right after we brought our older kids home, when we were kind of flailing before we really got our feet back under us, were really the hardest. And also it put us in this realization about kind of the lack of support in the mental health world, especially the pediatric mental health world. And so we just have a huge compassion for other families who are walking through similar situations. We just never dreamed in our wildest dreams that we could have a child with such obvious needs and all the diagnoses in the world that should have helped get her the help that she needed. And just to have professional after professional look at us and shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know what the next step is. I don't know how to help. We've already exhausted all the things that we know how to do, or you've already exhausted them before even coming to us. We get internet researchy, us moms, we start, digging into all the things.
Yeah.
And so I think that was super sobering to realize what a big hole there was. And if we don't help our kids as kids, then they grow up to be mentally ill adults. And, everyone is responsible for their actions. But when we look at some of these cases and we look at a long history, again, what's underneath behavior, a lot of times we see where our society has failed to understand these individuals from their childhood multiple times, on and on and on. And then all of a sudden you cross 18 and there's this societal expectation that you're an adult now and you should act differently. And you still haven't received the help that you desperately needed. And your behaviors were trying to tell everyone in the world that you needed. And then you find yourself, in prison, and then everyone's blaming you and wondering why you couldn't get your act together.
Right. That's tragic. It's heartbreaking. And I know from my background, even just like economically, $1 invested into kids in the first 7 years of their life pays off 7 times versus the too little too late solutions of, the justice system or welfare or unemployment or all the other things that we fund federally. And it still boggles my mind that like 15 years later, nothing has really changed to change that trajectory of funding towards the things that have been shown and proven to matter a lot when you invest early. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I guess my little part in the world is to help parents, because we are the ones with our kids all day long, and professionals are part of our team for sure. But they're an hour a week, usually at most, in our kids' lives and in our lives. And so I'm super passionate about just empowering parents to be that therapeutic parent, that we are the ones on the front lines all the time. And so if we can kind of correct course, even a little bit, we look at, some of the big failures in space history, right, have been because something was off by a half a degree on Earth, right? And when you take that to millions of miles, you miss the moon, right? Like one little thing can make a huge difference after a long period of time, which is tragic in those situations. But as parents, right, if we didn't just do a half a degree of a mindset shift early on at age 7, then we're in a completely different place in the teenage years versus if we had been off course that other half degree.
Yes. So another thing I hear is that if you work to become a therapeutic parent and do the work of becoming more conscious yourself of your triggers and finding more practical tools to react in the moment, it's exhausting. And it's really, 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 really hard. So how do you keep up the endurance for this ultra marathon?
I think it goes back to that foundational principle, right? We have to care for ourselves first. It can't be our kids and then us. It has to be us in order to care for our kids. I also think it does take a village, especially if you have a child with really significant needs. We were not meant to do this alone. If you look back in history, we used to be much more communal and tribal. And so it wasn't, 1 or 2 parents on a tribe of kids, right? It was a tribe of adults around a tribe of kids, and everyone kind of moved fluidly, and there were resources for everybody depending on the needs of the kids, and it moved in flux. And so I think we've lost we live in such isolation relatively to past cultures now, and it's much, much worse in a pandemic. So regular respite, it is not a failure to need a break from your child who has significant needs, or even not significant needs. It's not a failure to need a break from your child every day or every week or every month. I actually tell parents that they should always get, 30-ish at least minutes break from their child, whether it's a mandatory rest time, whether it's your child doesn't get up before a certain time every morning. It's okay to draw those boundaries. You do not need to be at your kids' beck and call all day long.
Yes.
Even if they're little, like there are things that will keep them occupied for 30 minutes where they won't die and you can keep them safe without actually being in their presence. And I think we all need a couple hours every week. It used to be things like mom's night out, but right now it could be, a drive to nowhere, maybe through, Starbucks drive-through is still open, pick up a coffee, go for a drive, tag out with somebody else, whether it's, someone you're co-parenting with, a spouse, a friend. And then I think we all need a couple days away every year. We have to kind of incrementally build these things in to our routine. And our kids, like you mentioned earlier, like they're watching us and they need to know what healthy parenthood looks like. I think about this a lot with my girls. I don't want them to see a mom who sacrifices her everything for the kids all the time. Parenthood is always sacrificial. So there's that. Yeah. But I want them, when they're parents, to feel okay, not like a failure, right? To take a night out, to take a weekend away and not feel like they're bad parents. And my mom was not good at this. I don't ever remember her leaving us, like ever, I mean, maybe for a date night here and there, but generally speaking, like she was a stay-at-home mom until we were in like middle school. And even then she worked a job that ended right around the time the school day ended and she had summers off. Like she found the job that allowed her to be fully present whenever we might need her. Right. Yeah. And so I think, and she's fantastic and she, did it well and with a lot more grace than I probably would have, but I didn't have it modeled for me that it was okay to need breaks because she was always there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it's not a failure to need a break from your kids.
Yes. Especially if we keep in mind that ultramarathon approach and we have to be training and we have to be taking care of ourselves and we have to be showing up the best we can every single day in order to keep this relationship going, in order to get to the end, really, without falling on our face, which does happen medically and, with our own health depleting and our body takes over if we don't do it intentionally. It's very stressful raising kids, especially from hard places. For sure. So before we wrap up, is there any other, I'll give you this soapbox to say, is there anything else that you just really feel passionate that you want to share and empower parents with, either advice or perspective or just what you feel like really matters?
So I'm always struck by this quote from Bruce Perry, and he talks about maturity being defined as the cumulative amount of positive social emotional interactions that a person has. Ooh. And I think about, how I approach behaviors or how I'm naturally wired to approach behaviors. And I think about the ways that I want to instill maturity in my kids. And it usually looks like the form of consequences or lectures, or you'll never be a functional adult if you keep doing that. Right. Yep. And so, especially if you're parenting kids with really big behaviors, a lot of the time, it is really easy to get into a pattern of constant negative interactions, right? Where you're constantly correcting. You don't feel like they ever do anything right. And you're always exhausted. And so this quote just keeps rattling around. So it actually, I created a training called the Laugh More, Yell Less Challenge, because I realized that we have to be really intentional, especially if our kids kind of tend towards being higher needs and bigger behaviored, that we have to intentionally create these positive social emotional interactions, because those are the things that are going to move them forward, not us stripping away and grounding them from all fun things ever, which we think will teach them a lesson so they'll never do it again. And let me tell you, I've tried that for years and it doesn't work. Yeah. But it always makes everybody feel better if you pause every Friday night at 5 and have a fun meal and a movie, or, before lunch every day, pull up the latest hysterical, funny YouTube video and just have a laugh with your kid. Create these memories. How do you want your kids to remember you as a parent? And we can't ignore behaviors. So I'm not saying that, but we have to be intentional at raising the nurture part. If we think about nurture and structure, the nurture part of our relationship. And so I'm glad you asked, because I'd love to offer that training to your folks for free. And they can go to my website, thecorkboardonline.com/failingmotherhood, to grab that for free. And I just think it's such a huge part of parenthood that's missed when we're chronically stressed, that we forget why we wanted to be parents in the first place. And the brain science around it gives me enough pause and motivation to make room for it, because I'm like, this is the key to maturity. This is the key to my kids, being the functional adults that I want them to be.
Yes, we need that. Thank you for offering that. I will post that link in the show notes for everybody to grab for their own. So thank you so much for offering that tool. That's a really practical way to start to build that in. Because, if it's not on our calendar and we're not being reminded to be intentional about some of those things, it's the urgency takes over and the behaviors, send their messages of asking for help. And that's really all our day then entails. So I love that. Thank you for creating that for our listeners. So the last question that I love to ask every guest that comes on is, how are you the mom that your kids need?
Well, I think by defining my success as what I can control means that I will be exactly who they need. And also I think recognizing that there's, not a quote unquote right way to do it all. There's so much grace, and that to be teachable. I think as long as we're leading the way in repairing well, like I don't do it right all the time, for sure, even though this is my job. I'm nowhere near the perfect parent. But if we repair well, that's an important skill for our kids to know too. So I'll always be exactly who they need to be, because I just keep showing up every day.
Yes. Well, they are lucky to have you. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all of your wisdom and for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Melissa just spit fire. I could not agree more with the wisdom that she shared and her life experience to back it all up. What did you learn? What were the aha moments for you? Join my Facebook group and let's chat about it. Also, click the link in the show notes or in my Instagram bio, because sanity, solutions, getting on the same page, having secure attachment relationships, and having the support you need is all there for you when you invest in yourself. Schedule your Sanity and Solutions session for free for 30 minutes. If the link is still active, you can snag a time slot. I can't wait to chat. Next episode will probably come out every other week. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.